Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. What we have for you today is another modification to a third generation Toyota 4Runner. On my 98 4Runner, I already have a dual swing out bumper that I got from CBI, and that rear bumper is getting a little lonely, and so I figured I'd give it a friend, and I'm gonna put a CBI front bumper on my rig now. We're gonna walk you through all the steps to do that. For the third generation years, there are differences. 96 to 98 had a different bumper. They had a more low profile bumper. Years 99 through 2002 had what was called a fat lip bumper. At the ends of the frame rails, there's different types of mounts. In the front ARB bumper install that we did for Sean's rig, you saw the mounts that you'd see on a 99 to 2002. Those are the ones we had to cut off to put the ARB brackets on for that application. For those years, the CBI front bumpers plug and play. You don't have to do any alteration to the frame at all because it's already ready to bolt up to that mount that's on the ends of the frame rails for those years. For the years 96 to 98, you're gonna have to do a little bit of cutting and a little bit of grinding to take off these tabs on the end of the frame rails, sort of like we did in the ARB bumper install on Sean's rig. And then we're gonna have to do some welding. So there's two supply plates that we'll show you in a little bit, and those are going to need to be welded to the ends of the frame rails so it will work for the years 96 through 98. Let me show you what the bumper looks like and all the hardware that came with it. So here's the CBI front bumper in all its glory. As you can see, I chose the option to get it powder coated, so it came like this from CBI, nicely powder coated in a black color. Now let's take a look at the hardware. For this front bumper, you're going to reuse a lot of the factory fasteners. If you watched our CBI dual swing out rear bumper install, you noticed there was a ton of fasteners and it was a little bit intimidating looking at all the stuff you're going to have to put together. This is a lot less intimidating. First of all, these plates are the plates that you need to weld onto the ends of the frame rails if you happen to have a year 96 through 98. So that's what these are for. If you have a 99 through 2002, you don't need these. These are the 6 bolts, washers, and flange nuts that are gonna affix the bumper to the front of the frame rails. These bolts would bolt to this plate that you weld onto your 96, 97, or 98 4Runner. These two little bolts and flange nuts are going to be used to attach the license plate to the front bumper. Finally, we have 2 lights that are going to be used for our blinkers. The first thing we're going to do is remove the stock bumper. And the first step we're going to do to get it off is we're going to disconnect the electrical connection to the blinkers. Now on a 99 through 2002, I know from experience you could just go up behind the bumper and it's really easy to get the electrical connection disconnected. On these earlier models, 96 through 98, the little tab you have to push is really hard to feel with your hands and it's pointing upwards. You're blind to it. Unless you have a little telescoping mirror, it's really hard to figure out where you need to push. So the easier way is just to remove the lens so you can get at the electrical connector easier. So this is just a couple small Phillips head screws, or more accurately, they are a JIS, a Japanese industrial standard screw. So this is an actual JIS screwdriver made by Vessel. So as you can see, this tiny little tab is pointing upward and you have to be able to try to feel that with your finger, which is almost impossible. So when I removed this bumper for the very first time, I got a little telescoping mirror to see where I needed to push and then got on it with a small screwdriver. But since Sean is a lot smarter than me, he suggested removing the lens, which is a hell of a lot smarter. You push it in with the little screwdriver and pull back, like so. Now you got the blinker disconnected. We're on the driver's side, and the first fasteners we're going to remove are in the fender wells. Right in front of the front tire, you go forward, there's a hole in the wheel well liner, and that leads to a 12 millimeter nut that you have to remove. I'm going to use my Milwaukee M12 cordless and zip it out. We got that flange nut off, and we're going to do the same with the other side. On both sides, facing outward towards the sides of the vehicle, we have 14 millimeter bolts holding the bumper bracket onto the frame. I'm just going to use one of my small DeWalt impact guns and zip them out. I'm going to leave one of the two bolts partially in so the bumper doesn't drop on this side just yet. I have the bumper completely loose on the passenger side. Now I'm going to go back to the driver's side, remove that last bolt, and take the bumper off. This bumper is super light, so one person could handle this no problem. If you have two people, use a buddy, but you can pull this off very easily. This is like super lightweight, nothing to it. So now your bumper is off the vehicle. If you remember the ARB bumper that we installed on Sean's rig, the end of the frame rail looked just like this plate that CBI provides with the front bumper. So on the 99 through 2002s, it has a plate that looks like this, and you don't have to do anything. You just bolt the bumper up and it's ready to go. With the 96 through 98, we're going to have to take these end caps off and then do a little cutting and grinding to get the rest of the plate off of the end of the frame rail. These bumper end caps on the 96 through 98 are bolted onto the front. If you look down into the frame rail, it's a 12 millimeter bolt that you have to remove. So that we're going to do that next. And this is what CBI is talking about when they say some cutting and welding is going to have to happen. We're going to grind off the welds on this and then ultimately weld this plate onto the end of the frame rail. Just to play it safe, we're not going to cut these little plates off of the ends of the frame rails just yet. We're going to test fit the bumper, see if it will fit with the thickness of this plate still on the end of the frame rail and enough room to be able to put this on. We're going to pre-install these plates onto the bumper so when we do our test fit, we'll know if we can either keep those small plates on the ends of the frame rails on there, or will we have to take them off because we need that space in order for the bumper to line up properly. So I'm just going to come in through the front with the bolt and washer and put the flange nut on the back side. These are just hand tight. We're going to do the same with the other side. The test fitting we're doing is only if you have a 96 through 98. If you have a 99 through 2002, you don't have to worry about this because you could just slide the bumper up and bolt it all up. Right now, because it's only two of us, we're utilizing, again, just like in the rear bumper install, we're utilizing a transmission jack to support most of the load while Sean and I get it in position and get a bolt started on either side. So right now it's facing flat. We got to get it up on end, and we can see that it needs to go a lot higher. That looks pretty close there. It looks like it's got to come this way. Slide it in. We just have to work it in slowly. There we go. Are yours in all the way?
Yeah, almost. There we go. Okay. I can get my bolt started now.
I think those plates have to come out. Where are you at on yours? Yeah. I think it's going to have to come out. Yeah, it's fully met up now. How are the bolts lining up?
Ever so slightly not lining up.
We're going to have to take the plates out. It's built almost to the perfect dimensions.
Yeah.
We got the bumper in place. It's fully against the ends of the frame rails, and we're noticing that the mounting holes are just a little bit off. So we now know that we have to remove those stock end caps off the ends of the frame rails so it will fit properly. We got the end plate off on the passenger side. When you're looking at the end plate, you could easily see that there's a weld on the bottom and there's a weld on the top. But when we started to try to pry this thing off, once we got both welds cut, we noticed there was some resistance, and there's an actual weld on the inside that you really can't see until you start prying on it and get resistance on this outside frame rail. And we checked out the driver's side. The driver's side is the same way. It's got a weld on the inside. So you have to cut on the top, the bottom, and on the outside section of the frame rail to get the plate clear. So here's the mangled plate that we were bent and got off the passenger side. You have choices available depending on what tools you have at your house. In the ARB install video that we did on Sean's rig, we used the cutting disc like so. But since you have to get up in here at an angle and you have to get close to other pieces of the body, we decided to use a different technique this time. So we're just using a cordless reciprocating saw. It's also a Milwaukee M12 tool, and we have a Diablo Demon carbide tip blade, the same blade that we used to cut out the cam sleeves when we did the lower control arms. So what you want to do is come in at a slight angle the blade forward, so when you start cutting, you don't actually cut into the frame member, you're just cutting the weld. That's what you want to do. Just cut the weld, but not the frame itself. So this is what I'm talking about. If I cut straight down, there's a good chance I'm going to end up cutting into the end of the frame. If I put it at a slight angle, it's going to go through the weld towards the front plate and hopefully not do any damage to the end of the frame rail, not take any of the length off of it. On this driver's side, you have this line for the AC condenser, so be careful when you're cutting. Don't cut into this or bump into it and break it. So just be mindful of that line. When you think you've gone deep enough with the blade, take a hammer and just do a test tap to see if it pulls away from the end of the frame rail. I'm almost all the way through the weld on the top. I just have to cut a little bit more. All right, I can now see daylight between the plate and the end of the frame rail, so I'm done with the top. I have to do the same with the bottom. I'm now laying on my back in order to get a better look at where the blade is going to be cutting. If I cut from a kneeling position, there's a chance that I might not get the blade in the right spot and I'll start cutting into the frame. The only downside to laying on your back underneath there is that the metal shavings are going to be coming down on you. Just make sure you wear some eye protection to protect your eyes while you're doing this. Looks like I'm through. Give me the hammer. Same thing that I did on the top. Once I think the cut is deep enough, I'm going to take the hammer, tap on the plate, and see if it separates from the end of the frame. Looks like I got a little bit more to go. I already know that this plate is separated at the bottom weld and the top weld, and there's no weld on this inside part of the frame rail. What's holding it up now is the weld on the inside, on the outside edge of the frame rail. So with a pry bar, maybe a big screwdriver, I just pried this end of the plate away from the frame end to give myself a starting point to get the blade to come in from the top and cut that weld on this side. I'm most of the way through the weld. Now I can just work it off like this. And it's finally off. You can see how thick that weld is, and that's why it took so long to cut through with the blade. It's pretty thick, especially right up here. Knowing that the welder I'm going to bring my truck to weld the plates on the end of the frame rails is going to want these old welds grinded down smooth, I'm just going to save him some time and grind them down myself so it's more ready to go for him when I bring him the project. I think I can get the front one in. The back one's a little bit close. Here, stop right there. Leave it right there. Okay, yeah, I'm in. You need to be tilted just a little bit more. Right now, the two bolts that are holding the bumper onto the frame are these two on either side, the ones that face outward towards the side of the vehicle. Eventually, these three bolts, this top one and these two bottom ones, are going to be also holding the bumper onto the frame. The plate that we need to weld onto the end of the frame rail is right behind this part of the bumper, being held on by these bolts right now. So now the next step is we have to go to a welder we know, and he's gonna weld on the ends of the plates, and we're gonna get the bumper fitting perfectly. All right, today is the day that I go to a local welder and I have him finish off the front bumper project by welding those plates on for me. He's also gonna assist me in getting the fit right before we tack those plates on and do the whole welding process on each frame rail. So the first step is we're gonna look at it and see what we have to do to the frame ends to get it fitting nice and square with the body, get it exactly where I want, and then that's when he's gonna go in and put a tack weld, and then we'll pull the bumper off, and then we'll finish welding the plate on each frame rail. The biggest part of this is choosing a good welder. Either go by word of mouth, somebody you know has used a welder and you know his work is good, or you go on Yelp and you find out the welder gets good reviews. What you don't want to do is go to your buddy who just finished one class of welding at a local community college and says, "Hey bro, I can do it for you." I wouldn't suggest that. Get yourself a good welder with a lot of experience to do this for you, because you don't want it to look sloppy. You don't want his welds to be weak. That's my best advice, is choose a good welder. Don't let your friend do it for you that has very little experience. And same with you. Don't get done with your first class at a community college and think you're going to take on a project like this. Wait till you get much better if you're going to be welding on your own rig. Practice on your buddy's rig. How about that? Now, since I'm going to be utilizing a welder, if you have any other projects, it's a good chance for you to bring other projects at the same time. So I'm going to be putting on rock rails, also known as sliders, onto my truck. So I'm going to bring him that project at the same time. And I'm also going to put a lift bracket and a drop bracket for my panhard bar. There's a guy on toyotaforerunner.org that sells these nice custom brackets that he created. And so I'm going to have the welder weld those on at the same time. So he's going to do 3 projects for me in one day. Now you have some choices on how you're going to go about getting to the welder with your bumper. Number 1, you can do all the work at the welder shop. You can take off your OEM bumper there, get the plates cut off on the ends of the frame rails, do all the fitment, and then get those plates tacked, and then have the welder finish welding the plates on. What I'm going to do is drive over there with the bumper on there with the fasteners I'm able to get on each side. 2 on the passenger side, 2 on the driver's side. The reason why I chose that route is because the welder's time costs money, so I figure the more I can do at home, the more money I'm going to save myself. I'm a tiny bit concerned that having only 4 bolts holding it on might not be the best idea, but I've got the bolts tight. It's not moving around. They're probably strong enough in order for me to get to the shop, which is about 30 minutes away from me, and so I'm not overly concerned. If you're going to follow my lead, I would suggest you wire the blinkers before you go to the welder shop. This way you have working blinkers on the way there, and you're not going to confuse somebody on the road, or potentially you'll get yourself pulled over by a cop because you don't have working blinkers. So there's that option. The final option, which I don't necessarily recommend, is you take the front bumper off, you put the bumper in the back of your rig, and you drive over there. In that scenario, you don't have a bumper protecting your front end, and you don't have working blinkers. So that's the least favorite option that I would recommend. So either do all the work at the welder shop or prep the vehicle by getting the front bumper off, getting the new bumper on, and held on by 2 bolts on either side with working turn signals so you can safely get there. All right, I'm off to the welder shop. Something nice to bring is some flat black paint so you can paint the frame when he gets done welding, or you just do it whenever you get around to it. It's up to you. All right, I made it to the welder shop and we have the bumper off and we're getting ready to start getting the fit a little bit better. To start off with, we centered the plate onto the bumper holes and we have it clamped so it stays steady while we get the bolts in. Once the bolts and nuts are tightly affixing this plate to the bumper, then we could take this clamp off and then go with our next step. The plate was prepped with an abrasive wheel to get ready for the welding on both sides. Same with the frame ends. Took an abrasive wheel, knocked off all the paint on all sides on both frame rails. Now we're gonna get the bumper back on and see what we have to do to get it fitting better. We found a fitment issue with the bumper on this side, which is the driver's side. It looks like this measurement is 1/8 of an inch higher than the passenger side, and maybe that's why we're not getting an equal gap in relation to the bumper to the body. We're gonna have to compensate that by augering out the holes for the side bolts to get it fitting a little bit more equal. All right, we're gonna get the bumper back on and now see how it's fitting after doing a little grinding. Okay, I got one started.
Book mine right.
With the grinding work that Wes did, it's now fitting much better on this driver's side. This was the side that wasn't fitting so well. So after he augered out the side mounting holes, it's now fitting a lot better and equal to the passenger side. So you see the gap in the body, looks pretty uniform here. And then we'll come around and take a look at the gap on the passenger side and how it looks in relation to the fender flare, and it looks pretty darn good. So Wes did a good job. The next step in this procedure is Wes is going to put a tack weld on those plates to hold them in position, and then we're going to have to take the bumper off again, and he's going to finish welding the plates completely around all 4 corners of the frame rails. How long have you been doing this, Wes?
Let's see, 18 years now?
Wow. So Wes is going to use a MIG welder for this project. Wes has a couple tack welds on the bottom of each plate. This is the driver's side, and this is the passenger side, and now he's going to complete the welding by welding around all 4 sides. As you can see, Wes does nice work. This is 18 years of welding experience. Like I said earlier, don't let your friend that just took 1 class at a community college do your welding for you. Get a guy that knows what he's doing. Now that the plates are welded completely to the ends of the frame rails, this is the time before you put the bumper back on and bolt it up that you paint these to protect it from rust. Not only do you want to paint the bare plate, but you want to paint all the areas that were sanded or grinded down in preparation for the welding, because you want to protect the metal from rust. Let's talk about how I'm going to wire the turn signals. This is one of 2 boxes that CBI sent with the front bumper. It has the blinker light and the wiring in it. Here's the lens, and this is the wiring. You have a plug that you just plug into the back. You have the two different color wires, white and black. The white wire did have a little end on it, so you can attach it to a grounding point. It had a little circle connector, and I just cut that off. And what I did is I butt connected it to a connector that I could disconnect. If I ever wanted to take the front bumper off, I bought these connectors. I got these straight from an Amazon seller. It's supposedly a waterproof connector. You just pull it apart like so, and you can see what it looks like. Now, their claim of it being waterproof is a little bit iffy because when you look to where the wires go through, you can see the metal connector down in there on both ends, on this one and on this one. So what I did to make it a little bit more weatherproof, I just put some clear RTV silicone into those holes to keep any water and debris out of there. To connect the connector to the blinker wiring, I used a butt connector with shrink ends. And what's nice about the shrink ends is that it makes a really tight seal around the plastic sheathing of the wire. It shrinks down, and on the inner diameter of the shrink ends, there's a glue. As you heat the ends and they shrink, the glue heats up and it forms a weather-tight seal onto the plastic sheathing of the wires. So no water or contaminants are going to get in there. To do the wiring work, I use these fancy wire strippers, and I'll put a link in the video description if you'd like to buy the same pair. And then I used a ratcheting set of electrical connector crimpers that I'll also put a link in the video description if you want to buy the same type. So these jaws right here are specific for working with shrink butt connectors. This kit that I bought has all these different jaws that work with different types of connectors. So these are the appropriate one to work with this style of butt connector. So now let's go out to the truck and I'll show you how I figured out which wire is the wire you want to connect the power to and which wire you want to connect the ground to. All right, so I'm on the driver's side of the vehicle. This is the wiring that goes to the blinker. It's got two wires for this connector. There's a white wire with the black stripe and there's a green wire with the black stripe. And I want to figure out which one is providing the power to the light and which one's the ground. I'm going to go into the vehicle and I'm going to turn on the left blinker, and then I'm going to use my test light to figure out which wire has the power. Right now I have the test light grounded to one of the bolts that bolt the front bumper on. So I'm going to go inside the rig and turn the left blinker on. I'm putting the test light into the white wire with the black line and I'm getting nothing. I'm going to put it into the green wire with the black line and see what I get anything. And you can see that it's flashing. So the green wire with the black line is the one that has the power. So that wire has the power and the white wire with the black line is the ground. On the passenger side, the colors are a little bit different. There's also a white wire with a black line, but then the green wire, instead of having a black line, has a yellow line. So it's a green wire with a yellow line. I'm going to test the white wire, nothing. Test the green wire with the yellow, and there it is. I got the light. So it's the green wire on both sides that has the power, and the other one's the ground. Before I start messing with the electrical and cutting the ends off of the turn signal wires, I'm going to disconnect the negative side of the battery cable just using a 10mm box end wrench. All right, now I have no power to the vehicle and I could safely start cutting those ends off. So I'm just taking a small pair of wire cutters and now I'm going to clip these ends off. I went ahead and cut a little section of this plastic black sheathing off so I have a little bit more room to work stripping these wires. So I'm going to get my wire strippers. I'm going to start with a 16 gauge and see if that will strip it. I have a feeling I'm going to have to go to a smaller one, but we'll see. Yeah, it doesn't even grab it. So let me try the 18. Almost. I have to go down to a 20. Yep. So these wires are pretty small. I had to go down to a 20 size wire gauge to get the strippers to actually take off the plastic sheathing. I'm going to start with the connector and I'm going to get one side of the butt connector connected. Twist the ends with your fingers to make sure it's a nice tight bundle of wires. and then slide it in cleanly. If you feel it's grabbed one of the strands, start over. So that went in nice and smooth. This crimper set has the different sizes, so I'm going to use the one on the very end. It says right on there it's for 22 to 18 gauge. Gonna crimp this sucker down like so. I'm going to do the same with the other wire. Now you have to decide for yourself, whatever connector you're using, which wire you're going to be used for the hot and which one you're going to use for the ground. I decided with this connector, the red was going to be my hot and the black was going to be my ground. So with my red being my hot, I'm going to match that up with the wire that's hot on the vehicle side, and that's the green wire with the black stripe on the driver's side. So slide it in the connector, come in with your crimpers and crimp it. Do the same with the other one. The black wire is going to be my ground on the connector side, and on the vehicle side, the ground is the white wire with the black stripe. Now the female side of this connector is connected up to the vehicle wiring. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink these ends with my heat gun. This is the gun I bought, and I'll put a link in the video description if you'd like to buy the same one. It's got an adjustable heat setting, which is kind of nice. You can dial in the heat for your particular application. After you shrunk the ends, just take a second look to make sure that the shrink ends are nicely wrapped around the plastic sheathing of the wires, that it's made a good seal on both sides, and it looks pretty good. Now I'm going to take the light with the male connector and I'm going to feed it through the bumper, and this light just kind of snaps in place. The rubber grommet will make a connection with the hole in the bumper. There we go. That's fully seated, and now we'll make the connection. And that's one side done. I'll have to figure out what I'm going to do with the wires. I'll zip tie them up somewhere here. There's a bracket right here with a hole in the front that I was able to put a zip tie through, bundle up the wires a little bit and zip tie it there so it's kind of out of the way and the wires aren't dangling downward. I'm going to do the same procedure on the other side. I'm going to strip the wires, get the connector connected up to the factory wiring, and slide the light in through the front and make the connection. You listened to me earlier talk about the reason why I added this connector, so I can remove the bumper in the future. And you might be thinking, well, didn't the supplied wiring just plug into a connector on the back side of this lens? And yes, it does plug in, but from messing with that connection, I found out that it's a very positive connection. It's not the easiest thing to unplug once it's affixed to the back side of the lens. A connector like this is much easier to disconnect and reconnect than it is with the plug that goes into the back of this lens. So that's why I chose to wire in this connector instead of just using the supplied wiring plug as a disconnect point. It's just going to be easier with this style of plug. I've got them both wired up, but what's weird is that the blinker now blinks really fast, faster than it did before, and I don't have an explanation of why that is. I guess I'll have to do some searching on the forums and try to figure out what, if anything, I did wrong, because I don't think that's right that the blinker's going so fast. So I have working blinkers, so that's a plus. So here's what I figured out why the blinker's blinking so fast. The lights in those blinkers that came from CBI must be LED lights, and those draw less power. I'm actually reading right off of something online that I looked up, and it says the relay has a feature that when one light goes out, the resistance is lower, so it will blink faster to let you know that the light is out. Since LEDs require way less juice, it makes the relay think a light is out and will blink faster. So what do you do about it? Some people say that they just cut the conductor for the lamp failure detector. I don't think I want to do that. There you can buy a relay that is meant for LED lights, so I might look into that. Or from what I read, you can get a load resistor kit, wire that in, and that will fix the fast blinking problem too. I found a forum post on toyota4runner.org, and somebody linked a turn signal relay that worked for him, so I bought it on Amazon. It's gonna get here in a few days.
2 days later.
Alrighty then, I ordered a couple different relays for the turn signals that are meant for LED lights. Both of these relays supposedly work to fix the hyper blinking on a Toyota 4Runner, so I went ahead and bought both because they're not all that expensive. In the video description, I'll put links to one or both of these depending on if they actually both work. If only one works, that's the one I'm going to advertise in the video description for you. So let's go out to the truck and let me show you how I'm going to install this. I'm on the driver's side and here's my fuse box. Supposedly the relay for the turn signals is behind the fuse box, so I'm going to take this panel off that fits underneath the steering column so I can get better access to the bolts that hold the fuse box in, pull the fuse box out, and then supposedly I'm going to find the relay behind there. If you haven't done so already, remove your negative battery terminal off the battery so you have no power to the vehicle. If you saw our transmission temperature gauge install video, we removed this piece in that video. It's 4 10mm bolts, one in the top here, one in the bottom right, one in the top left, and another one in the bottom left. I'm just going to zip them out with my Milwaukee M12 cordless ratchet. This should pull out pretty easily. I still have the hood release and the gas fill hatch release connected to this trim piece. I'm going to see if I can get away with keeping them attached while I'm getting the fuse box out of the way. The fuse box looks like it's going to come out with 2 10mm bolts, one in the top left and one in the bottom. Getting this top left 10mm bolt out is a little bit hard to get to, so I'm using a 1/4 inch ratchet with a medium length extension with a swivel to a 10mm socket to get in there easier. I now have the top left 10mm bolt removed, and there's a clip right underneath here. It's going to be hard for you to see, but I'm going to pick it up just a little bit to clear it of the clip, and now it's sort of free. I want to give myself a little more room to work to get this thing out of the way so I can look behind and look for that turn signal relay. So I'm going to remove this air tube. It's just a Phillips head screw, or more appropriately a Japanese industrial screw. This sucker should just pop out. Pretty simple to remove. Now I could pull this thing out a little more and see what I'm doing. Which one is it is the question. To get a little more movement out of this fuse panel, I disconnected this upper right connection so I could just fold it down further and better show you what I'm doing. I started pulling on some of these thinking that they might have been the turn signal relay because I wasn't 100% sure which one was the relay. I finally figured out that this one right here in the center near the top is the turn signal relay. It's kind of camouflaged in a way. When you pull it out, it has this little plastic extension on it, and so I couldn't really see how many prongs it had because the dead giveaway was that this has 3 prongs. If you get a little screwdriver here, there's 2 little tabs on either side, and if you release them, you can pull this thing off. So here's something to note. It's got this connection here that's not doing anything. It's not actually plugging into the fuse panel. It just sits there because when you put this cover over it, it blocks that connector. So that 4th connector is not doing anything. So it is truly a 3-prong connector. Now let me show you the 2 relays that I got. So when you compare the sizes, this one from Novita is more of a match to the original one than this one is. So it doesn't look like this little plastic adapter that goes onto the OEM turn signal relay is gonna fit on either of these. It doesn't really fit. Let's just put one of these in here and reconnect the battery and see if the turn signals are now working and not hyper flashing. So I'm just gonna come in and plug this sucker in. I'm gonna reconnect this connector that I disconnected, and then I'm just gonna set this thing into its little spot here. I'll reconnect the battery. Good thing I bought two of them. This Novita one didn't work, still hyper flashes. I tried the bigger relay, it worked. Let me show you. I'll turn on the turn signals and you'll see that it's going slower. And the right one. There's the left front one working like it's supposed to. Here's the right front one working like it's supposed to. Here's the right rear working like it's supposed to. And finally, here's the left rear working like it's supposed to. So it was successful. Since this upper left bolt is a little hard to get to, I'm gonna keep the air tube out of my way for now to make it easier. So again, I'm using a short 1/4 inch extension with a swivel to a 10 millimeter and try to get it back there and lined up. I pretty much think you have to use a swivel for this. It's going to be really hard otherwise. Now I'm going to get the bottom one started. And I'll just cinch these up really lightly because it's just holding a light fuse box. They don't have to be cranked on. That's tight enough. And that's tight enough. Now we'll get the air tube back in. This just snaps in place. You just get your little screw back in. That's pretty much it for the tube. With your air tube back in, now we just got to get this bottom panel back in place. Just note that this has a foam seal around it, and one corner of my foam actually came off on the panel side and ripped out of this corner. You might just want to pay attention to that and try not to damage the foam as you get it back in position. Now all you have to do is just get your 10 millimeter bolts back in and you're done. These 10 millimeter bolts aren't holding a whole lot of weight, so I'm just using a tiny 3/8 ratchet, a shorty, and I'm choking up on this thing and just getting them snug, because I could see how you could easily strip the female threads on this if you go too tight. Just get your negative battery terminal back connected to the battery and tighten it up with the 10 millimeter. All right, no more hyper blinking turn signals. It's fixed. To finalize this install, I went to a Fastenal shop and I got myself some other M10 bolts. These are actually an M10 bolt with a 125 pitch. Part of the reason why I replaced the bolts from the original ones is I wanted to go to a bigger washer, because remember, we had to open up the hole in this part of the bumper a little bit more in order to get the bumper to drop 1/8 of an inch. So I wanted the washers to be capturing the bumper a little bit better. So that's why I went with bigger washers. So this is an actual M10 washer going to an M12 washer. This is the passenger side. I went ahead and did the same thing on the driver's side. I replaced both the factory M10 bolts with ones from Fastenal. Also at the Fastenal store, I bought myself some thicker washers because the ones CBI provided were just a little thin, and when I was tightening these bolts, the washers got a little distorted. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You can see how it got deformed. It just bent as I was tightening the bolt. A little bit thicker washer is kind of nice to have to mount the bumper onto the frame. If you want to look more cool as you're driving down the road, maybe cruising the mall, get yourself some tow hooks. And I will put a link in the video description of the ones I bought with these isolators and this other piece, so if it rattles around, it's not going to be metal on metal. So here's the license plate attached with those two small Allen head bolts and nuts that I showed you at the beginning of the video. Getting the nuts on the back side is a little bit problematic because you can't get your hand in there. I would suggest getting your license plate on first and then putting the bumper on. It'll be easier for you. I was actually able to get the nuts on the back side, and what I did is I went through here with a telescoping magnet, and I basically was able to fish it over to here and line up the nut so I can get the bolt started. But that's a lot harder than just getting your license plate on first and then getting the bumper on. So that's the way I would suggest you do it. One thing I was considering is removing this bracket and maybe trimming some of this mud guard out of the fender well. For right now, I'm just gonna leave it as is, but I think it might be a cleaner look with this bracket off and then trimming this mud guard somewhere right around here to where it's just a cleaner line. All right, so here's the long-awaited final result of the front bumper install. This is the way it looks like on the driver's side, how it meets up with the body and the fender flare. Panning out here, give you a shot what it looks like from the front. Zooming in on the front here. Panning back out. Let's see what it looks like from the passenger side. And then zooming in on the passenger side and seeing how it meets up with the body and the fender flare on this side. CBI does have provided mounts for accessory lighting. I've seen people with the light bar on the top here. Then there's light mounts on both sides, on the driver and passenger side, that fill up this hole right here, and I'm probably going to add those a little bit later on. This is the other mounting location on the passenger side. I'm also planning on putting on the Warn M8000 winch that I ordered through CBI also, so that will be another install video. I have to say that I do like the way the CBI bumper looks on my rig. Looks are kind of secondary for me. I'm more of a function guy, but I have to admit this bumper does look pretty nice on my 4Runner. I'm sure I'm gonna get all kinds of compliments as I go around town, cruising the mall. All right, we're done with the install of the CBI front bumper on my 3rd generation Toyota 4Runner. It seemed like it was gonna be just really straightforward, but there were things that came up that I wasn't expecting, like having to deal with the hyper blinking turn signals because the lights supplied by CBI are LEDs. As you saw, it wasn't a really hard thing to do. You take that bottom panel out underneath the steering column, you remove a couple bolts that hold the fuse box in, you get that little air tube out of your way so you get a little more room to work. You unplug the relay, you plug the one in that works, and I'll put that in the video description, and it's done. So that was pretty simple, but an unforeseen problem that I didn't expect with this install. The other problem was we noticed that in the manufacturing process of the bumper, it was just a little bit off. It wasn't sitting perfectly straight on my 4Runner. I told CBI the problem with the fitment of the bumper, and Kenny had the fabricators recheck the jigs and make sure everything was correct. And he said it was, so possibly when they were welding it, it slipped a little bit in the jig, and that's what causes it to get off that 1/8 of an inch. Now, was I gonna lose my mind over it? No, because it was a pretty easy fix. We just had to ground out the side mounting holes on the driver's side to make it fit right. If I was crazy anal, I could have said, I'm gonna send it back all the way to CBI, but I think that would have been sort of ridiculous, especially since the fix was so straightforward. So what I'm trying to say is, you might find a little imperfection, you might have to do a little bit of manipulation to make it work. I wouldn't suggest sending a big old bumper all the way back to Idaho just because something's a little bit off. Just work with it. With all that said, thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We will be back with more videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Ugh.